There's a vast amount of racism in American film, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
No, the religion is actually just manipulating people and leading people into unjust wars for no good reason other than to keep the rich rich. Whoa, man, mind blown.
But you're not thinking like a capitalist there.
I'm not. That's always been my problem.
It's a nice liberal nationalist movie where the president can go blow up aliens with a jet fighter, and yet you're still not actually being xenophobic. It's kind of amazing.
The whole QAnon universe, I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have.
You know, the best they really have is like gentrification and real estate speculation in hospitals.
Yeah, that's that's Cleveland in a nutshell right there.
Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff. It is a movie that should be watched by organizers and radicals and leftists and anybody who wants to make a better world. This movie, on the other hand, means none of those things.
It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers.
Really regressive gender politics, like incredible, but to the point of near parody.
No, Norm, George Wendt in this movie definitely would have been wearing a MAGA hat if this movie was made nowadays.
Oh, God, right? And then convince the workers to break their own picket.
Yeah.
Fuck this movie. It's,
Damn, I wish this movie was better, because that's a kick-ass ending.
This is a paint-by-numbers propaganda movie that completely works because the characters are compelling and real.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller, and on this episode, we are looking at Falling Down from not 2000. See, I had to screw it up. You know, why did I never go into acting? I wonder. From 1993, directed by Joel Schumacher and starring Michael Douglas and Robert Duvall. This is the first episode of our summer theme. Now, if you've been listening to our podcast or gone through our back catalog, which you should, because we've got a lot of great episodes.
It's all gold.
It's actually all gold. Every single one is just an all-timer. Basically, summer of 2020, we did the 60s, where we went through the 60s, basically the early 60s to 69, year by year. Last summer, we did the history of blockbusters. This summer, we're a little bit looser. This time, we have a very loose theme of reflections on American urban landscapes, basically in film, which is obviously, there's obvious ones. We could go for a lot of Scorsese here, but I think we can have some interesting political points to pull out of this, right? Because this is especially in the post-war period, but even before, sort of a real, let's just say this is an area where a lot of politics can be pulled out.
Right.
Very specifically. And Falling Down is a really good example of this.
Is it?
Of politics being pulled out. That doesn't mean...
Oh, okay, yeah. I was
just
focused on the really good part there when you said really good. I was like,
hey,
the jury's still out to me on whether or not I think this is a good movie or not. I think I'm leaning more towards it's got some good and interesting parts to it, but I don't think it's good overall as a movie.
Well, I think it's one of these interesting movies, and we should do the multiple synopses real quick. But just to say, I think it's one of those interesting movies that's uneven all over the place.
Very much so.
And that makes it really interesting to talk about. Doesn't necessarily make it a good movie, but it makes it an interesting one.
Oh, yeah. And for anybody that's a new listener here, that's sort of like our approach to films here. This isn't like it's good, thumbs up, or it's bad, thumbs down. Not to knock Siskel and Ebert. I enjoy their criticism. But like even mediocre and bad movies have really interesting political angles that are, like we said in our intro, you know, some are intentional, some are unintentional, artistic and political messages within the film. So just because it's like not a movie I love or consider it a great work of art or a great film doesn't mean that there isn't something interesting to pull out of and discuss within the movie as well. So I have a problem with the plot synopsis for this film on both IMDb and on Letterboxd. I pulled the IMDb one first, which if people are unfamiliar with this movie, it says, an ordinary man frustrated with the various flaws he sees in society begins to psychotically and violently lash out against them, which isn't wrong.
It's not wrong, but it is fucked up.
Right.
And as listeners will realize in a moment.
Yeah, so I took a swing at writing a couple other alternative ones to that. I think one that you edited a bit for me, Isaac, to make it a bit better, but a white male snowflake representing the existential crisis of post-Cold War American can't handle even the slightest obstacle in his life and lashes out violently one hot summer day in LA.
Yeah, that's also a good description.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would necessarily get people to click play. It would get me to click play.
Bill Foster is an ordinary man.
Where you going?
Going home.
Not this way, you're not.
Why not?
Metro rail construction, that's why not.
Living in the everyday world.
I don't suppose you have a couple of bucks you can give me. It would really help me out. If you give me your address, I'll mail it back, honest.
A patient man.
Can I help you?
Yes, I'd like a ham and cheese omelet and a little wham fries.
I'm sorry.
We stopped serving breakfast at 11:30.
Who's running out of patience.
I get some change for the phone, please.
A peaceful man.
No change. I have to buy something.
Who's about to be pushed.
85 cents. 85 cents.
Doesn't give me enough money for the phone call.
Drink. 85 cents. You pay or go.
A little too far.
I stay.
You mean you stole your baseball bat, but he paid for the soda?
Just standing up for my rights. As a consumer.
Oh, this guy's discriminating.
What kind of vigilante are you? I am just trying to get home to my little girl's birthday.
Give us your briefcase.
And if everybody will stay out of my way.
Here, you want a briefcase? Here's my briefcase. There's the briefcase, huh? Wait, wait a minute, wait.
Then nobody will get hurt.
Warner Brothers presents
Say, would you get off my golf course? I am.
the story of an everyday guy who refused
Fine. Baby, whoa.
to take it one more day.
You know, is there a better example of, you know, this term I don't care for too much, but the fragile ego of the snowflake out there than, isolated, crazy white, right wingers?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's a term of the right, and I don't think we should usually be borrowing those. I mean, I think people like to turn it on them because we're actually all fight. The thing they're trying to mock, like sort of people being angry about, things that are not important, but in reality, those things are very important to both sides in these struggles. And
right, care and empathy are like qualities you want in a person. They're like, oh, you're such a snowflake. Mike, I don't think you know what you're talking about here.
But like, you guys also care about these things. That's why you're trying to like get rid of trans people. And we are recording on the day after the Roe v. Wade ruling.
Right.
And right. Culture wars is the wrong term for a lot of this stuff. It's deeply material. It's deeply tied up in. It's not a sideshow.
Right.
But let's just say that it is sort of like the dominant masculinity, right? That which he represents,
mm-hmm.
which is, I think actually this movie does a really good job of representing that as masculinity, but also is intertwined with class and economic position, right? And
yeah, here and there, I think, yeah.
I mean, sort of, where he's sort of positioned, but both him and Duvall, because they parallel each other. He's a. I mean, the reason I say that he's an avatar of Cold War America is because he looks out. He's out of 1965 with his haircut, with his sort of buzzed, flat top haircut, and his white shirt, and like
the black tie and like the whole corporate America outfit from like 7-Year Itch or something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He works for a defense contractor. He's constantly I did these things to defend America, but the Cold War's over, right?
Well, he even calls out specifically like defending America from communism.
Yeah. Like that's
in this 1993 movie.
In this 1993 movie, he hasn't let that go.
Yeah.
And, he is sort of this avatar of this thing, and he has expectations about how his family was supposed to function, and expectations about how his work was supposed to function, and expectations about the ease of, obviously we're dealing with an era in which a particular version of this avatar is very important politically. But it's changed because it's 30 years later.
Right.
But think about people complaining about not being able to get haircuts during early COVID.
Oh,
right?
God, yeah. All the preppers who were like ready to go to a bunker for a year and a half if something happened. Can't go 3 weeks without a haircut.
Right, because actually what you want is your easy suburban life, and that you are, this is your expectation, everything is about expectations dashed, the things that were owed to you as an American.
That's what I was going to say. It's the ease that you're talking about there is like, not just the ease, but like, I'm owed this because I'm a white male in America.
I'm a white male in America. Yeah, exactly.
Heterosexual white male in America.
Right. And so he's a particular portrayal of frustrated masculinity. And then Duvall is another portrayal of frustrated masculinity. And I think actually if anything, more interesting and nuanced one.
Well, yeah, because it's Robert Duvall. I mean, you cast him and you're going to get a certain caliber, which is very high, of acting. So that leads me, before we get into, and I want to kind of talk about the cop angle here before we get into the film itself.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask you briefly, Isaac, here at the top, first impressions of this movie, but specifically for the genre. As you already mentioned, it's uneven kind of tonally, as we'll discuss as we go through the movie a little bit. But when I finally got done watching the movie, I think my first genre choice for this one is it's more satire and political than it would be like drama or comedy. How did you feel about this kind of like genre or tonally when you first finished watching it?
I mean, I think it is, maybe a social satire to a certain degree. I think it's a drama and a social satire.
Okay.
But like a very weird and uneven one. And I think it's very reflective of the early 90s in, I think, the confusedness, right?
How so?
Well, it's, it's very much like, we'll get into this, especially in the final scene, but it's like, it's the system. It's, they lied to me. It's whatever, but without an actual target named.
Right.
So that it's very political, but in a certain sense, it's a very 90s sort of like, but what? It's that post-Cold War moment. It's very much, this could be a 70s movie, but like a more reactionary, like on the more reactionary end of a 70s movie.
Yeah.
Except that it can't avoid, especially once again in the climax of the movie, a certain degree of sensationalism and like easy convenience for its plot.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Some laziness there, and a foot chase. With Duvall cannot do a foot chase. He's in his 60s, I think, by the time this movie comes out, and he's not running anywhere.
Well, he runs like a block to the pier, but I see what you mean. Yeah,
but like on screen, it's on screen. You're just like, yeah, he's not really,
Right.
It's so it has that feel of sort of this. I don't know. There's this. It feels like a jumble of things, and
yes.
I think that has to do with the movie as a whole. But I also think it, like just the issues with like how it was made and who made it and all of that. But I also think it might have to do with the time period that it's coming out in, which is in many ways, we're living in an extremely reactionary period, but we live in a polarized period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, the Clinton era is one in which, there's a lot of political polarization and so forth, but actually there's a solid neoliberal consensus and things that it's in, we can recognize it as the age of Reagan and the solid era of that. And so portrayals, it feels less conflicted in terms of like portrayals of masculinity and so forth. Well, the movie is very conflicted about them, but it's a much more reactionary period in some ways than today.
Well, and one of the things too in this time period we're talking about, as far as like, especially like society reacting, this is in the era of the Rodney King riots. Like, in fact, it was the riots after the cops got off for beating Rodney King on camera that riots kicked off. It actually shut down production of this movie because they were filming in and around LA. And in specific, even within that time period, if people weren't around for that or don't remember it, there was this conflict within society, especially in LA, of Korean grocery store owners, which we'll get into with basically the first scene of the movie, and the Black and Latino neighborhoods that they were operating grocery stores in. And it's fascinating to me that the scene in the movie is actually still there when that was a huge component, and people were killed during the LA riots. That scene actually is still like the kickoff of the movie, and not, I don't know, it's just like the opening bit of racism within the movie,
right? And
not played up as like the dramatic climax or anything. Well, it wouldn't work as a dramatic climax, I guess, but It just has that feel of like, well, if the riots were happening now and this movie was being made, like, oh, we got to cut that scene out because that's a little too close to what's really going on here.
Yeah, no, I mean that's just it. Is like this is a period of urban crisis. It's a period of the war on crime. It's a period of the war on drugs. It's a period, it's a period of macho masculinity on film, right?
Oh yeah, this even comes out the same year as I was thinking of macho masculinity. It comes out the same year as like Last Action Hero with Schwarzenegger, which is its own like commentary on that role in Hollywood in general. Granted, it was a bomb at the box office, but you know what I mean. Like it's a point where Arnold's already even making fun of his own masculine presence on film,
right?
And you also have this movie.
Interesting.
I hadn't really thought about those two together, but anyway. So, but we this movie lends itself very easily to not exactly like a full scene by scene analysis, but we picked out like some of the main scenes that follow through the Michael Douglas defense character, which also I think we should probably point out now. You mentioned already he was a defense contractor.
Well, not a contract. He worked in a defense.
Sorry, worked in a defense. Yeah, within the defense industry. His name is William Foster, but he's so also just taken on his job as his identity that his personalized license plate is D Fens, Fens. So he's referred to that as like his character name throughout the movie. So there's also something I think that lends itself to me more of the whole like social satire element to it, because also as we go through these scenes, there's so many just over the top, outlandish characters and things that he does that when contrasted with like the Robert Duvall scene or some of his more moments of humanity, you're like, what are we doing here, movie? Like this tonally is just so wildly swinging and all over the place. But when your character name essentially is defense, like he's taking on like his well, it turns out he actually doesn't even have the job anymore. Former, defense worker. Like that's his identity.
I sort of that swingingness. I mean, it's Schumacher.
Right.
It's also, once again, I sort of associate that with a 90s movie, especially the first half of the 90s movie, where even when you're trying to be like doing a social, like socially realistic film,
sure,
something that's trying to catch something gritty, they can't do it 70s ways anymore. It's got to have a submachine gun somewhere in there.
And we do get there. Even a rocket launcher shows up in this gritty urban, movie. And you're like, a rocket launcher? Yeah. Not just for Schwarzenegger movies anymore.
Do we want to set up just the structure? So like, basically.
Oh, like the dual narrative here?
Yeah, the dual. Yeah. So like part of what's going on is he, at the very beginning of the movie, he's stuck in LA traffic and finally loses it and gets out and says that he is going home. And we don't know. This is, Douglas's character, defense. We don't know what that means. And then we see him as he slowly works his way through the urban hellscape of LA toward his ex-wife's place on his daughter's birthday, calling her repeatedly, with her repeatedly calling the cops and them being useless. And we'll get into what that means, because this is actually like not good, right? They are broken up for a reason. So that's one narrative. At the same time, you have Robert Duvall's character, who's on his last day as a cop. He works in theft, I guess, specifically. He's now a desk jockey. There's some I guess he's requested to do that because of his wife. He's just about to move to Arizona, to some shithole in Arizona that his wife wants to move to. And he has a parallel story of masculinity in dealing with his wife, basically dealing with his wife, dealing with the cops in his job. But he's the only one, and he gets his partner in on this. He's the only one. I guess they're partners, but they're friends within the department.
I think it's a former partner, because she's actively out like investigating like crime, robbery and stuff. And he's at the desk, like you said, just taking reports for, theft or whatever that comes into the station.
Because at the behest of his wife, he got off the streets.
Yeah.
But basically, so he has all sorts of interesting masculinity issues that we can get into. But he is slowly putting together that we have a nutcase who is throughout the film picking up more weapons, slowly moving his way. And he's the one who's figuring out. So you have a parallel narrative that finally meets at the end of the movie.
Right.
So it's actually, I think it's actually a really well executed structure.
I like it a lot. Yeah. I think it's really engaging. And like you said, I think part of the tonal inconsistencies that were bugging me was that you have Robert Duvall doing a very, I think, kind of nuanced and pretty subtle
Extremely subtle.
performance here, but also because he's not the outspoken, racist asshole with a sack full of guns comically shooting up places and running through LA, or not running, but like terrorizing certain specific neighborhoods within LA. He's more reacting to and dealing with all of this. Well, like you said, kind of like the emasculation part of it here is that like, you're not even a cop anymore because you're at a desk. And I was like, I feel like there's more cops probably working at desks. There's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy to these institutions, as opposed to the ones out on the streets just, killing people.
So he's seen as henpecked, right?
Right.
And he's seen as, and I'm going to get into how they fail to deal with this narrative. Like they do it in a reactionary way that confuses the overall themes of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like how they've seen as henpecked, he's seen as cowardly. His commanding officer ends up saying, I don't like you because you don't swear. I don't trust men who don't swear. He's soft spoken and sensitive, which you could see as propaganda under normal circumstances, except that other than his former partner, all of the other cops are terrible, don't give a shit, are bad at their jobs in every way.
Right.
And there's more than one police department involved in this, because all of the cops that go to, all of the cops that go to Defense's wife's house when she's calling, because she has a restraining order, basically are sexist and condescending and don't stick around and don't take her seriously, including a woman who shows up and does the same thing and just says, make sure that you vote for police funding if you want
a female officer. Yeah.
It's so, I'm sorry, that scene is just amazing to me because it feels so much of this moment of like failing institutions.
Yeah.
Because, after the Texas shooting in which the cops don't do anything and people start to, wait, the cops don't do anything.
And also, I think if I've heard or read some commentary correctly, like legally aren't required or obligated to do things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The Supreme Court is, it's so that they can't be sued for negligence, basically.
Right. Yeah.
But the effect of that is that technically they don't have to. But part of it is it's so much of, well, if you want more of this failing system,
fund it more.
Fund it more. But you were there. You could have dealt with this, but you didn't because you wouldn't stick around. So part of it is, this is actually, despite the fact that you have a good cop in there, this is one of the least propaganda movies I think I've seen, because you don't have your dirty, hairy, corrupt cop who turns out to be right.
Well, the one who turns out to be right and actually does save lives and save the day as far as this movie's going is not going to be working there tomorrow.
Yes.
Like the good cop, if you want to call it that, in this particular story is like on his way out because he's surrounded by bad cops.
Well, and because, well, and
that's not his reason for leaving. Sorry, but that's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because his wife is, his wife has been a stay-at-home, well, they've lost a child, so that's damaged their relationship. His wife has been a stay-at-home mother. She was high school, like prom queen type, who doesn't have anything else. And so there's tensions in the relationship because she's very demanding because this relationship is literally all she has.
And she's worried then, because of that, for his safety being a cop, which I think precipitated his move to like, I'm not going to be out on the street anymore.
Right. And so whereas Defense has sort of, his family fell apart. We should just say this out of the bat, because he's actually violent and over the top, and demanding. He demands that everything be perfect, and the image of he has. And when his child or his wife don't fit that image that he has, he becomes angry, and that caused things to fall apart. Both of them are dealing with the crisis of this sort of classic patriarchal family. And
it doesn't look like the way the magazines made the American dream look.
It just doesn't look like it.
What's wrong with this place? God damn it. Let's go start shooting up places.
So let's do the scene by scene, and then we can sort of talk about how they deal with that theme at the end.
Right. So as we kind of go through this scene by scene, I wanted to mention one thing to kind of keep in our brains as we talk this through. And that's this idea of audience identification with protagonists. When we go into films, especially American films, I think that's a larger topic. Other countries deal with this in their narratives in far more interesting and nuanced ways, I think, throughout film history. But in American films, we want to know who we're cheering for. Who is our audience character that's taken us through this story? And in this one, it's set up to be Defense, Michael Douglas's character. It's not specifically Robert Duvall's character, although I ended up liking that character more because, again, it was more nuanced to it. I think he's a better actor, etc. But it's Michael Douglas in this movie. So you've got, presumably, if you've seen the poster for it, if you know the premise for it, if you've seen the trailer for it, going into this movie in 93, you've got the image, like you said, Isaac, very well, like basically like the 1960s kind of office worker. He's got the briefcase, the white shirt, the tie, what do they call that military, like the high and tight buzz cut haircut. And he's carrying a briefcase and a shotgun on the poster of the movie. And he's not taking it anymore. He's the guy, lashing out against the inequities of society in LA. Like that's the way the way the trailer sells it to you. It's the way the poster sells it to you. And this is also a Michael Douglas who, at this point in his career, we've seen in most recently in 93, it was Basic Instinct, huge hit. You go back to like Wall Street, Fatal Attraction, like he's legit movie star. He's opening this movie. He's playing this role. So he's the guy that we're going to presumably have our sympathies with. Now, the long line of like anti-hero protagonists, I'm perfectly fine with. Obviously, I've mentioned on the show a bunch. I'm a huge Martin Scorsese fan. That's kind of his stock and trade, is kind of anti-heroes that he examines, and the role of specifically men in culture and in society. But you've got like Taxi Drivers. We've mentioned Targets a few times on this show. Peter Bogdanovich's film, the Peter Boyle movie Joe, even Joker, I think, up to a certain point. Like I did a Joker rewatch pretty close to watching Falling Down. I was like, damn, there's some comparisons here that I hadn't thought about. When do our sympathies fall away from the Michael Douglas character as we go through this narrative? Like he's our audience character, and I feel like the way that Ebro Smith, the screenwriter, and Joel Schumacher, the director, and Michael Douglas, the performer here, are working together. It's an interesting kind of give and take of how they're trying to keep, I think, audience identification and audience sympathies with this character when everything in my mind is like, fuck no. And I feel like it's not really a full embrace of him as an anti-hero. It's really trying to get across to the audience that he has a legitimate grievance. I think they're trying to do that in this narrative.
So, and I think this is part of why it's confused, right? That he has continuous legitimate grievances, but the way he handles them is complete overreactions. I mean, everyone in this film that he runs into is an asshole, just about.
But that's the satire level to me too, where like and we'll get to those here in just a second, but like they're so over the top,
right,
in their portrayal of these little inequity. Well, they're not all little, like from the little inequities in life to like larger, huge societal problems.
Right. But the first scene where you lose him is the first scene where he loses it, because he's in the
hold on. I don't think everybody does though.
Well,
as you're watching this movie, because the first scene sets the groundwork. I think the first scene is him in LA traffic. It's the heat. The editing sequence here is great. It's showing all these little things that are just picking away at him. He can't get air conditioning. It's LA traffic. It's standstill parking lot traffic. And he's just like, enough. I'm getting out. I'm walking away from my car. Anybody who's been stuck in traffic has had that fantasy of like, oh,
right,
God, yeah, fuck it. I just want to walk away and be done with this.
But so part of it is, this is the confusedness of I don't think you're supposed to have sympathy. I think it's the confusedness of it. I don't think you're supposed to actually have sympathy for. So he goes in, the first scene after this is that he goes into a convenience store run by a Korean immigrant to make a phone call, and he needs change. And the store owner will not give him change unless he buys something.
85 cents. What? 85 cents.
I don't understand.
85 cents. 85 cents.
85 cents? That doesn't give me enough money for the phone call. I'll give you 50 cents, you give me 50 cents change.
No way.
Yes, way.
Drink, 85 cents. You pay or go.
What's a phi? I don't understand a phi. There's a V in the word. It's five. You don't got V's in China?
Not Chinese. I'm Korean.
Whatever. You come to my country, you take my money, you don't even have the grace to learn how to speak my language. You're Korean. You have any idea how much money my country has given your country?
And then when he starts to look at prices, he freaks out because everything seems so expensive to him.
Right.
But he's openly racist. It's the first scene there, and you see him being openly racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the filmmakers intend you to be sympathetic. I think if you lead off with somebody being openly racist, that is an attempt to not make him sympathetic. Now, the thing is what he's complaining about is this sort of reactionary in the good old days thing. This is America. You just came here, how dare you, take away, the good life that I had, right?
Well, he even says in the scene, you come to my country and you don't speak the language.
I mean, I think you have a little bit of an American History X problem here.
A little bit.
Except that he's not cool. His masculinity, he somehow makes it through these violent situations and like comes out on top, but he's actually pretty incompetent at violence. He's not like physically capable in a lot of ways.
Well, he's trashing the store like a teenager in a biker movie in the 50s.
Right.
Like hassling the shopkeeper. He's just like knocking over displays and.
But I think this first scene, you're actually not, I think you're supposed to immediately be aware that this is actually like bad.
I think you and I are, but I think generally, because I've talked to a couple people, like my brother, who's a huge fan of this movie, my cousin in particular, I remember him loving this movie when we were kids or teenagers. It's the whole idea of like, yeah, it's price gouge. Like they're upset about like, yeah, why is everything so expensive? They're not focusing on like, he's being openly racist to this guy. That's fucked up. They're more on like the focus on the grievance he's got, which they're like, yeah, you know what? Why is stuff so expensive? That is price gouging. Why should a can of soda be $1?
So I think this is the confusion. I think what I mean is I think the intention of the filmmakers is for it to not be good. But I think the effect of their, this is actually annoying in real life, but this isn't the way to deal with it. I think it's the confusion with how they've made this movie.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like you start out with him having for especially more reaction. I mean, nobody likes price gouging, but like also actually those prices are probably not gouged. Like prices adjust as, time goes on and currencies slowly devalue. But actually your wages in terms of consumer goods up until right now when we're in a big inflation burst, but certainly in the 90s, despite wage stagnation, like consumer goods and things like that, you weren't necessarily being gouged on. I don't know. Maybe food is a little different, but yes, that's like a very relatable thing.
Right. So it's a weird tonal mix of like, it's a relatable thing, but it's also wrapped up in like overt and unacceptable casual racism.
But like, but here's the question though. Is this our own reflection coming through? Because
I don't know.
Because a lot of what we're going to see him complaining about is stuff where it's petty.
Right.
Right. Like he's complaining about the little annoyances of life that drive you over the edge. Right.
Which I feel like is like the humanizing aspect that the screenplay has to it. In the same scenes as like, no.
Right. It's like, no, actually, it's not. None of this is a reaction that is okay. And of course, part of it is he ties it into a version of American nationalism and a version of sort of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the stuff that most makes him, that's also supposed to make him relatable, but most makes him unsympathetic is dealing with his wife and child. Because it's so obvious what's going on, right? That he's, but even that's going to get confused, frankly.
Hold on that because he hasn't actually even had an interaction with them yet. As we were going
so let's wait on
the
that.
The important thing that you pointed out to me in the convenience store scene is that he references specifically rolling back prices to 1960.
You think I'm a thief? No. You see, I'm not the thief. I'm not the one charging 85 cents for a stinking soda. You're the thief. Just standing up for my rights as a consumer. I'm rolling back prices to 1965. What do you think of that?
As he trashes the store. So again, we're going with this callback to this fictional version of like, white America that didn't actually exist at the time, even in 1960, but like it's his fantasy version of like, when he as a white male had absolute power, I guess, or something.
It's interesting that he chooses the 60s. I can't remember what year actually it is, but it's roll it back to the 60s.
Yeah. There's a dude in the 90s in this movie. Like it's set in 93.
Right. Well, I mean, it's when he was a kid. Um,
Oh, that's a good point. Also, yeah, it's set in 93. It doesn't even reference like Rodney King or anything that's going on in LA, but whatever. Again,
well,
I think that's why it's like at the satire kind of like fable level.
yeah, well, it is.
Some scenes.
I think it is totally a satire fable. I mean, part of it is it's being shot while Rodney King is happening, so they don't change the script. It just,
But it's not even mentioned
yeah,
either. So it's interesting that way. But the point, like, so you referenced the 60s explicitly, but then also in this interesting, I wrote in my notes as like kind of like this interesting video game structure. He gets his first weapon. He acquires his first weapon, which is a bat. So he takes the bat from Michael Paul Chan, famous character actor who plays Mr. Lee, who owns the store here. And then he's off on his next adventure, or the next, I don't know what they're the next level in the video game.
So what's next? Does he call his wife for the first time?
Don't remember if he gives her a call the first. I think he does call his wife after this because he does end up. He doesn't steal the can of soda. He still technically pays for it, but he gets the change he needs now to call.
So that's the thing is everywhere he goes, even when he's brandishing a weapon, he's always pays for things because he is an upstanding citizen.
Meanwhile, he like trashed the guy's store and threatened him and was, hurling racial slurs at the guy. But technically he didn't steal, so it doesn't go to Robert Duvall's department in the police department.
Well, but it also means he's not one of those. He's not trying to cheat the system, right?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So much of this is about what I'm owed, right? And it's that middle class, that white middle class idea of, well, I paid my way, I did it, even though you're heavily subsidized by the federal government in a very racially specific way in the post-war period and all this. But no, I did the work. Why am I not getting what I deserve?
Right. So then the next scene he goes, he's it's this like gangland scene. So it's like, turf wars within certain neighborhoods of LA. He's resting for a minute and fixes his shoe. He takes off his shoe. I think you see like a hole through the shoe and he folds up a piece of newspaper to fix his shoe. And then two gang members, you're trespassing. This is our block. You don't belong here. At this scene, he ends up confronting them. So you see like, okay, this guy is prone to violence. Again, you'll see it another like, but it's couched in this, like, it's not unprovoked. There's two gang members here threatening him with a knife.
So, and specifically, so the racial dynamics of it. So in each of these encounters, we have racial dynamics.
Right.
First we get the Korean store owner who preys on us and gouges us. And the second one is very stereotypical Latinx gang members, right? Like out of central casting. Exactly.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so he's sitting there in this sort of empty lot looking at, kids who are also not white, like Latinx kids playing the poverty, like it's nearly shantytown levels. And also the shoe hole is the first clue that something weird is going on with him, because why does this guy, why does he have a hole in his shoe? It's not explained at first.
It's also the second scene, so he hasn't walked that far in this plot. Like by the end of the movie, that would make sense, but
right.
Yeah.
And so these guys walk up and are saying like, this is their turf. And it's like, it's not a free country anymore. I can't go where I want to go. I can't be in, because these, really.
Because gangs control everything. Jeez.
Because gangs control everything.
So at this point, he ends up using his briefcase and the bat, I guess, as well. And again, in video game terminologies, he upgrades his weapon. Now he's got a knife.
Right. He beats them up and takes the
knife from them, which then instigates it kicks off the next scene, which ends up being a drive-by shooting, which was a big thing in the news. If you were, I grew up as a kid in the mid to late 90s, and like that was a thing portrayed in movies to a certain extent, but it was like, I feel like that was just one of those things on the news where like a drive-by shooting. It was like, was it really that big of a problem, or what's actually going on here? But because the gang was wronged on their turf, they go and they grab all their weapons. They're driving around in a full car with a sack of weapons, and they're going to go look for defense. Like, there's a white guy walking through a Latino neighborhood, like he's going to stand out. And so we get a drive-by shooting scene.
Yeah,
where they're targeting defense.
Except that this is the first scene. So he's been calling his wife, and the phone's been busy, partially because part of the time she's calling the cops, right? And she's also trying to organize her daughter's birthday. And this might be the first, maybe he gets through to her. I can't remember exactly when. But, like you get these I think those are very revealing cuts within the narrative, basically, where you have
Yeah.
these conversations where we're starting to get a sense of, oh, this is, I feel like we're slowly revealing more of like how messed up this person is.
Or how prone to violence he actually is, or what kind of like a hair trigger temper he has, because his wife is explaining this, because the cops do come to her house to like take her statement because she's gotten a call from him.
Well,
and she knows that he's heading for the birthday party that will be at her house shortly.
I mean, the part of it is that first scene with the cops. I know we're going to I guess these are sort of like side scenes that sort of fit together. The first scene with the cop who's like, she basically said, he never hit me or the child, but he could. Like, it felt like he could. And this cop basically is just, totally.
All he hears is, he didn't hit me.
He didn't hit me. You can totally see sort of the male identification with this. Oh, this crazy woman is just making this stuff up to hurt her ex-husband.
Being hysterical.
Yeah. I'm going to ignore this. I mean, there's some really effective portrayals of masculinity in this film in all sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so you have the drive-by shooting. He's like trying to make a phone call, doesn't even notice it's happening. They don't hit him at all. They just hit bystanders.
Right. So it's like, I even wrote down, I was like, all right, the white guy he stays still, not even fazed by this. Again, this is why it's like a heightened satire level to me, where like, this guy isn't like a used to gunfire kind of guy. Like, they don't portray him as like good with guns or going to a shooting range. They don't really get into much of his backstory really at all. So it's like comical that he's just like, oh, look, a shooting, or like doesn't even register. Meanwhile, everybody else is panicking. Other people are being killed on the streets around him. And then this is the point too, where then the car ends up crashing as it pulls away from the scene, the drive-by shooting car, and he upgrades his weapon once again. So he's now doesn't need the knife. He upgrades to the guns. And he even has a line, he grabs like the duffel bag of guns out of the car. I think he even shoots one of the gang members like in the leg. So he does actually shoot a gun off once.
And I think this is where we can sort of, what's being played with here. I mean, as you pointed out, he's not very good with guns, right? He doesn't really know how to use them. He's not, he's playing at stereotypical masculinity, especially as you'd seen in peak films, but also sort of your John Wayne types or Dirty Harry, right? But
I was going to say Dirty Harry or Bronson, like Death Wish.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Thank you. Death Wish is the actual, probably real reference here.
Yeah.
Death Wish is somebody who, was a civilian before he started shooting people. And except that like he's making it through all these scenes, but like he's actually like, they're sort of deconstructing this stuff a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's failing at these sorts of masculine things, yet somehow sort of making it through. That's sort of, and this is the nuance of his position, which is sort of like, what is the sort of thesis of it? So he shoots the guy in the leg because he's not a murderer, right? I mean, he is actually, but
and will be, but yeah, at this point we haven't seen him actually murder anybody yet.
But it's also that like in his own self-image of what he is, he's not going to do this. And it's that self-righteousness that holds him together and also creates some audience identification, but is actually part of the fucked up ideology that drives him, right? Of an American citizen and what he's owed.
So again, like I think we both said, like we were out as far as like I'm on this guy's side when the convenience store scene happens. You're like, wait, whoa, what's going on here? And that's fine. Like I don't need to be like rooting for the audience, the main character. I can, enjoy like a great, fucked up horror movie or anti-hero at saying something. It just feels like what is being, I guess, said by following this character as our protagonist is something I'm just not on board with. And I don't feel like it's doing a full critique of it either. It's more just like, I don't know. It feels like it's just leaning percentage wise of the movie more into reveling in like this guy has these legitimate grievances rather than taking a full satirical look at it or doing something else with it.
Well, but the fact that he's sort of clumsy throughout, I think, is taking it apart. And in that, and we should get to the next scene because I think you're constantly drawn out of sympathy with him and into sympathy, right? So.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it does have an ebb and flow to it.
Right. So the next scene.
Well, the next scene, then he ends up again. It's this like floating through unscathed as a privileged white guy can actually do in this particular environment. He goes to the park. He just wanders through a public park, and he's immediately honed in on by what is the most comically well, not most. He's the second most in my view, comically over the top character in this movie. And it's just like it's a homeless guy who like says he's a veteran. He like is overtly hassling, specifically Michael Douglas. He follows him throughout the most of the park, just going through the long list of what somebody could be hounding you for spare change for. First, it's for like gas in my car. Then it's because I'm a vet. What did you fight in Vietnam? You're not old enough. Oh, I forgot. And also he asked for money for food. He's currently eating a sandwich while asking money for food. It's this comically over the top version of like a homeless person asking you for change.
Right.
And I think it's another one of those where like there's people who could watch that and be like, oh, I have been hassled by somebody who's, down on their luck more than I am for change. And that annoyed me for whatever reason. But like it's done as this like, isn't just this the worst thing in the world kind of tone. And at the end of the scene, he ends up giving away the guy's like, you got to give me something, man. So he gives him his briefcase and just keeps the guns, which is like a character trait I think that we're supposed to see now. Like, okay, he's given up fully this like fake defense contractor life because he doesn't actually have the job. He's been let go. We'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah, we don't.
But now all he has are weapons.
So yeah, he's giving that up. It's also the second clue after the shoe that something weird is going on, because inside the briefcase is no papers, no nothing, just his lunch.
Right.
And that's it. And the guy's like, what the hell's going on? I think so. Like part of it is, this is another. So what's the identification? It's being hassled, but this is also another fucking moocher. Go get a job, loser. Why are you?
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. Where are your bootstraps at? Come on, man.
Where's your bootstraps at? The irony that we find out later, and you might have forgotten this scene already, but is that this is somebody without a job too, who's lost it. But
I don't know if we know that in the context of the film yet.
We don't know it in the context of the film.
Right. Okay.
Right. So part of it is, in some ways he looks like the straight-laced, dad of a Vietnam War anti-war protester saying, get a, the dad of a kid protesting the anti-war movement in the 60s saying, go get a job.
Right.
He's that reactionary image, which, sort of a Reaganite mentality, or a welfare reform mentality, which has
like that Peter Boyle character from Joe.
Yeah,
I know that's pre-Reagan, but still, or like.
Oh well, yeah, Joe's the early 70s, but he's a representation of that. So he's like very much in that mode in this scene, except it's like this guy coming up with like every excuse, and then but the guy says like, "This is my park."
Oh, right.
So once again, it's these spaces are not for you. This has been taken from you.
Right.
This is no, like, as you go through the hostile territory of an alien landscape that's been taken over by moochers and gangs and aliens.
People who don't belong here.
People who don't belong here.
Yeah. I mean, come on, Isaac, where can a white guy go to find a safe space these days? How about a fast food place?
Sure.
That seems about as white and safe as you can get. So the next stop is he goes to a fast food place, and here the big egregious problem with society is that I can't get breakfast food at 11:05 a.m. because they stopped serving breakfast at 11 a.m.
Right.
My God.
We stopped serving breakfast at 11:30.
Rick, have you ever heard the expression, the customer is always right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, here I am, the customer.
That's not our policy. You have to order something from the lunch menu.
I don't want lunch. I want breakfast.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm really sorry, too.
Get a gun! Let's get organized.
Calm down. Just calm down, everybody. Just sit down. Sit down over there. Hey. Mister. Where are you going? No. You sit down there and you finish your lunch. Come on. Everybody just relax and take it easy. Come on. Why don't you eat your lunch, please. Eat your lunch. You all need your vitamins A's and B's and... No, it's an accident. It's an accident. It's an accident. The trigger, it's sensitive. It's okay. It's all right. It's a sensitive trigger. Rick, could I have my breakfast, please?
Yes, sir. Sheila?
No, well, and this is one of the other scenes where this is both annoying and it is sort of like, where's the service anymore? We're not getting what we're owed. I mean, he ends up changing his mind and getting a burger, and the burger isn't what's advertised. Like, quality is gone.
Right. It's not what the picture looks like that you're selling me.
The little guy, the deserving office worker, working man, is not getting what he deserves out of this, right? This isn't what we were promised. But he pulls out his gun, and everybody's like, "Oh, sir," like they they're trying to get him breakfast, and then he switches and they try to get him lunch, and he's walking around, and it's so interesting. I think Douglas is.
Well, hang on, just to make sure we're painting this
Yeah.
clear now. At this point, he's walking around with a gun in his hand, like a large automatic weapon of some sort,
right,
in his hand, airing all of his grievances to anybody who will listen in the restaurant. And at this point now, we're like, okay, now we're in like terrorist mass shooting kind of level potential here. Like everybody in the restaurant is like acting as if because they are a hostage to this crazy guy with a gun in a fast food restaurant.
Right. And so this is the thing is, I mean, this is actually, I mean, you've been sort of, I think you've shot some fires at, fired some shots at Douglas's acting, but I actually think this is an example of like him doing a really good job of, in this scene, part of it is that you see what he believes he is. He's the archetypal normal guy. And why don't, he thinks that if he goes up to these people, I mean, this is part of he being the normal guy who's sort of entitled to, to be understood.
Right.
He thinks that if he walks up to these people and has a casual conversation, there's a certain pleadingness, and we're going to realize as we go along what's actually going on here with him. But there's a pleadingness in his interactions with these people who are absolutely terrified of like, aren't I right? Isn't this normal? But
if he could just plead his case as to why he feels aggrieved, everyone would be like, "Oh my God, you're right."
And there's a respectability.
But he's doing it with a like automatic weapon in his hand.
Right. They're absolutely terrified. Everyone is totally terrified. But he's doing it with this particular tone of respectability. So, ma'am, sir.
Oh, you're right.
Right. It's a particular, which is already sort of anachronistic in a sense. It goes back to sort of his. It's interesting to choose the 60s, but sort of a 60s or 50s, but the invocation is 60s sort of image of like a world in which there's a particular order, a social order of how we interact with each other.
Also, mostly like a white order to be.
Yeah.
Specific to the time period he's fallen over. Like I get respect because I'm me.
A white middle class order.
Yeah.
Specifically. Right. So like a specific white ordered middle class, sort of petty bourgeois.
Yeah.
That's what he's invoking with his family, as we will see. And that is what he expects in this interaction in which everyone is terrified, partially because he doesn't know how to use a gun. So he shoots the ceiling.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, I forgot to mention the gun has already gone off at this point. So to anybody who's just in the restaurant, this guy is bitching about how he can't get his breakfast food, 5 minutes after breakfast cuts off, which also is like 1990s hack stand-up comedy material. I mean, it's like right next to complaining about airline food.
Right.
But now this is an actual bit in the movie, and then he pulls out the gun, it does go off. So like everybody else realizes like, oh, this guy is shooting and holding us hostage. That's the reality for them. Because this is also the scene in the movie where I don't know if it's the first example, it's the first one I wrote down where I was like, this movie has as two realities going for it, which I think is also an interesting thing to watch in the current political reality we have in 2022 here, specifically in America, where you've got the Michael Douglas version of reality where like he's owed all this stuff and he's like heading to the birthday party for his daughter. He's clearly got a split from actual reality. They don't want you there. You are a danger to them and frighten them, and you're divorced for a reason. And then there's like the reality that Michael Douglas has, which is like, I'm just trying to get to my daughter's birthday party.
Right.
So there's like a two reality going on here, and you see it really well in this scene. And I think I have problems with his portrayal of this overall, but I don't think it's necessarily maybe even Michael Douglas's fault. I think it's kind of like a lot of the music choices I have huge problems with in this, where it really pulls your sympathies towards this guy musically. Like he's our protagonist, like the way the music cues come in here. But this scene in particular, I think is actually really well played by him because he's playing it from his perspective of his reality in this scene.
Yeah.
Like you said, where he is like a little bit of respectability. He's trying to get people like, hey, but this doesn't look like the picture on here. Isn't it crazy we can't get breakfast at 11:05? Versus the reality that the other people in this scene are living with.
Right. Well, so actually, I'm going to say I know we're saying I think you think Duvall actually does a better job, and I think that's true. I actually think these are actually two very strong central performances, and because we're going to see this again and again, and we see him fall apart, and I think the difficulties that he have more to do with the contradictions of the film itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Than his acting. I think he really, when he's given this stuff, he really does it. He really does it.
Right.
It's.
I think some of it might be just trying to strike the right tone, because some stuff is like so wildly over the top, and then next scenes are like very like intimate and tender, and Douglas is able to kind of switch that up. But I think Douglas's part ends up having wilder swings of tone.
Right, and he has
don't quite work within the film, even though he's doing his best as an actor.
Well, one other thing, and I think this will culminate when we talk about the end of the movie, but keep an eye on the mass shooter thing, because he's exactly that.
Yeah.
That is actually exactly what he is. He's not a mass shooter because that's not what he ends up going for, but his psychology is exactly that.
Oh, yeah.
Of a modern mass shooter. You could do this movie about a mass shooter, but you couldn't do the sympathizing satire because that wouldn't work. But because, but that is literally his psychology is that of a mass shooter.
Oh, 100%. I even wrote that down. I was kind of thinking about this audience identification thing, that I was like, defense is kind of such a specific type that we see a lot more in society right now, where like it's this undercurrent of white male racist violence that kind of wanders through society largely unnoticed until they lash out and end up shooting up, grocery store in Buffalo, or a temple in Pittsburgh, or a Walmart in Texas, or whatever hate crime has happened since we hit record on this and have put this episode out, which is why I got into that identification thing with like, when do you pull away from this character as you're falling, even if you like do agree with any of like the grievances that he's got, at what point are you pulling away from him as like, I don't like this character anymore? I think that's kind of an interesting thing to kind of watch as you go through the film here.
So, one thing about the mass shooter phenomenon is, so yes, it tends to be white males. They've sort of replaced the serial killer. But it's always male, but it's not always white. It's usually is. In fact, the last round, the church in California,
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Nobody talks about that one. The Taiwanese church. That has to do specifically with Taiwanese and Chinese politics. And actually, the media had a lot of trouble figuring out what was going on there and how to frame it. And then the shooting in Texas, which I don't think that the shooter there was white. They're all male. And so, but they're all male.
Oh, you mean the school shooting in Texas?
The school shooting.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Part of what you're dealing with, or one of the theories around this. So these tend to be related to right-wing politics, but even when they're not, there's a commonality of isolation, and there's a commonality of there's certainly commonality of entitlement, but also of social isolation, and frankly a suicide drive. Because most mass shooters are functionally part, and this is, I've seen this point made about, well, armoring it, basically having more armed guards hasn't helped because they do it anyway. It's not deterring them because they want to die.
Which I think also plays in with me to the ending here too.
Yeah. Oh no.
But like you said, this film has just got like, it's got that psychology all over it for Michael Douglas's character.
That was actually what hit me. Is like, he's exactly that. So it's part of it is like, doing mass shootings has been a way to express these things, usually for reactionary politics, but even when it's not, for underlying reactionary way of dealing with with their angst and ending it.
Right.
You want to go out with a bang for some reason. Anyway.
So the next scene is important, just to point out for the defense character, is that he's buying a snow globe. I think it's a unicorn snow globe for his daughter's birthday. So like, it reminds us he is on this journey. I don't want to call it a hero's journey because I don't think he's the hero here, but he's on a character journey to his daughter's birthday party that he pictures in his head as his reality. Well, I obviously need a present for her. So he gets her a unicorn snow globe. But while he's doing that, he watches a very brief cameo from the great Vondie Curtis Hall playing a black man outside a bank who can't, I think he like can't get a loan for his business. He's yelling about how he's not economically viable. That's his quote. He's yelling over and over again, and is taken away by the cops, arrested for protesting outside this bank.
And this is, I think, actually a pivotal scene for Defense's sort of evolution. It's also interesting because, and this is where the sort of immigration part comes to it. Defense may be racist against Black people, but he doesn't express that, and it's not portrayed as part of the Odyssey. And I'm not sure what that means. It may be that this is more of an anti-immigrant movie specifically, or people who can be coded as immigrants who may not be.
Well, from his perspective is.
Right, from his perspective.
Yeah.
But so this is someone who couldn't get a loan, who's out there basically losing it, right? Like in some ways he's very parallel, except that his way of dealing with the fact that he's getting screwed over is, I mean, for one thing, Defense is screwed over, but not really, because it seems like he's mainly done it to himself. But this person actually has been, but his dealing with it is much more positive, even though it's, I mean, he's protesting, but he's basically, he's not mentally okay. He's lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And Defense is just staring at him, and you can see once again, like there's recognition that they're the same. And we're going to see why. We don't know why yet.
Right. But it is pivotal because like the surroundings so far haven't really had, and his external surroundings haven't had an effect on Defense so far. It's just been him and his grievances towards what's going on.
Right.
Whereas this like, oh, this, and I don't even know if he could articulate in the scene like why that connects, but he ends up using this not economically viable phrase later on that you're like, oh, something did connect in that. And it's not even an exchange that it's direct between the two. He just sees this happen.
Right.
And then I guess we should say heads up here. Like I'm not going to use any of the wording, but there's some pretty rough stuff in the next scene when Defense goes to a surplus store that I want to say any racial or minority group is pretty much would be offended, and slurs are used against everybody when he's at the surplus store.
He's trying to go to an army surplus store.
Because his shoes, he needs new shoes. He's got the hole in his shoes, and he's like, "Well, I need to get some shoes."
He wants to get combat boots specifically.
Yeah.
And there's a certain transformation to him as we go through this scene. But the owner, who sort of looks like a stereotypical, he sort of looks like a biker, but and as we'll see, the owner is actually a Nazi. But there's two men in there who are clearly a couple who are gay, and the owner basically harasses them and kicks them out, and it nearly turns into a confrontation.
This is interesting though too, because the owner sees Michael Douglas come in. I think it's the character's name's Nick. I think it's Frederick Forrest is the actor playing it. Again, very over the top. But what happens within the store though? Michael Douglas is looking for boots. This couple is also in the store. The owner goes over and joins Michael Douglas, trying to sell him some boots.
Mm-hmm.
And so because he recognizes, oh, that's my guy. And then starts mentioning that these are like, I think he calls them like queer stomping boots. And he starts really assaulting the couple that's there verbally. But once he has a guy on his side, he thinks.
Well, but it's also that it's not just that he recognizes him as his kind of guy. It's that he knows who Michael Douglas is because he is a police scanner, and he's figured out who this is.
And he's on his side. He's a fan at this point, really.
Yeah, he believes that this is somebody like a kindred spirit doing, So part of it is, along with Duvall, he's the one who's, I mean, it shows the competence of the cops because the cops haven't put together, but with a police scanner, this guy has already figured out, if you put this together, this is this guy, right?
He knows he knows what's going on. And all he has is the same information the cops have.
Right.
I just think it's an interesting dynamic. The guy is running this surplus store. In this particular neighborhood, I don't know why this couple would be coming in to shop at the surplus store. I mean, the guy's an overt Nazi, like pretty obviously. So that's why, again, it's like this is satire level, because why would this couple be shopping at the surplus store to begin with? Well, because the scene needs to happen, and we need to show how overtly racist this Nazi asshole is. But he isn't mocking this couple until he has somebody else on his side. So now it's 2 versus 2. I just thought that dynamic was very specific in this scene. I mean, he may have eventually just like harangued and overtly harassed this couple until they left the store. But once he sees like the guy who he's a fan of come into the store, and he's like, oh, I got this guy with me. Maybe he's trying to get Douglas to lash out.
Or he's performing for him.
or performing for him, like, hey, you know, I'm on your side kind of thing. So it seemed like it emboldened this guy.
Yeah.
In a way that he may not have been if Michael Douglas hadn't come into the store that day.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, the owner of the store lies to the cops, covers for him, is also really sexist toward her.
Like, oh yeah,
really gross.
So he hates the cops. He hates anybody that's, you know, not white and straight. Hates any kind of minorities whatsoever.
I should also say that the queer representation here, you know, part of it is these men are coded as gay.
Yeah.
And they're also like, the reaction here is one of them is like ready to kick his ass.
Right.
And probably could if you compare the two people.
He's a big dude. Like, it seemed like that he could probably take this guy out.
Yeah, well, I mean, the guy's not, you know, like, so like, that's, I think, is an interesting portrayal, because it is, I mean, you know, it's one more stop on our urban Babylon of like white straight male, like what is the world come to, but also like this, you could treat that as the queers are out of control, because the guy knocks out, sort of paralleling Douglas, actually, he knocks over a case as he's walking out.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, but at that point, I'd be like, I would have been rooting for these guys if he were going to fight him. Like, I don't blame the guy for like knocking over a rack of sunglasses.
Oh, I don't mean it's a bad thing. I mean, sure, right. You know, like fuck that guy, but like fuck the store owner. But it's just they end up leaving, but they're not. You know, you could either, if you're seeing it from a reactionary direction, well, these are uppity queers, or right. You could say that they're not portrayed as unmasculine.
Right.
They're portrayed as
potentially capable of handling his own with this Nazi.
Right, of perfectly comfortable with a physical situation.
Right. But also not one that they initiated. Like, this is not unprovoked.
Yeah, it's not unprovoked, but I think it's just an interesting bit of queer representation there.
Yeah. Well, it's not like we say like the quote unquote like sissy character that you get in like a 70s.
Exactly. We're not not dealing with that anymore.
And I don't know, that might be because you have Joel Schumacher directing here, as opposed to like I'm trying to pick on somebody else that was around at the, like, you know, Michael Bay movie would probably have more of like the sissy character or something. You know what I mean?
Some afterglow of that at the very least.
Right.
But it wouldn't have been like that. Yeah. No, I mean, this is something where you wouldn't expect that from Schumacher. You'd expect him to be actually pretty aware and sensitive.
Right. Right. Which is kind of interesting. So anyway, yeah, like overt, you know, Nazi, what a surprise, running a government surplus store, shows off. I mean, again, then he just fanboys out with Michael Douglas's character with Defense, because he's listening to all his exploits on the police scanner. And he even says, he's like, well, I'm your friend. Like, I'm one of you. And then Michael Douglas's reaction, he's like, I'm an American and you're a sick asshole.
Well, so part of what he's done is he takes Douglas back into the back where his actual personal collection, his massive collection of weapons, including
gas canisters from World War II.
Well, it's specifically a Zyklon B canister that was used in the concentration camps to kill Jews. And he's like, can you imagine it killing, insert a slur here.
Right. How many it took out. And he's like, almost like smelling it like, oh my gosh, like he just could not be more just like fetishizing this instrument of death.
And so part of it, I mean, this is another bit of the critique or satire. So this American reactionary image that you have, and maybe this is intentional on the part of the filmmakers. I thought initially it was a way of making Douglas more sympathetic because, hey, he's not a Nazi.
That's what I'm thinking with like this whole audience identification thing, where I was like, you put him in this context for a reason as a screenwriter. And it's so that you're like, oh, okay, well, he's not that bad.
But would there be another way of looking at this where, at this point in the American right, there's out and out fascists, whether they call themselves neo-Nazis or not varies. But there always have been, but like they've been mainstream within the Republican Party much more than they would have been at this point. Though you had David Duke running for...
I was going to say, mid-90s, though, you do have like a very strong militia movement.
Right.
That is going on. You have, just look at Oklahoma City.
Right. I mean, it's but those are still like just under control in the fringes. But like part of what it is like, so this image of sort of respectable white male, middle class, I'm owed, I'm anti-immigrant sort of image, maybe what the movie is saying is, yeah, the reason a Nazi confuses you for one of your, for themselves is because that's actually what you are, whether you realize it or not.
Right. It hasn't realized it quite yet.
I think you could read the scene either way, but I bet you people are going to go the sympathy way more, that this is actually a mild sympathy builder, because at the very least, he's not a Nazi.
Well, and this is why I think it's this weird tonal thing where I was like, you're trying to get me on board with this like lighter version of a racist asshole. He kills the store owner.
Well, he defends himself. So that's
what I'm saying. So it puts you back on like, okay, well, at least he's not that bad, and he killed the overt Nazi.
Right. Using the knife, actually, that he took from the...
oh, that's right. Yeah, because he keeps upgrading, but also keeps in his inventory, keeping the video game analogy going. He keeps in his inventory the other weapons that he's already acquired, and then also he acquires even more weapons because now he's in a surplus store. Why wouldn't you take more of these weapons?
So he takes the rocket launcher that the guy was going to offer him in the first place before he rejected him, and he also, along with the combat boots, puts on sort of combat fatigues.
Right.
So he's fully transformed into an urban commando.
He's leveled up and is ready to go. And then very telling, I think, in this case, this is another. I wrote it up as like the point of no return here for this particular character. One, he's like actually killed somebody now. He calls home from the surplus store to his wife and does get to talk to her on the phone. And he even mentions, it felt very out of the blue to me, in some South American countries, it's legal to kill your wife if she insults you. And so I think that gives you a hint at like what she was talking about with the police, who were, completely dismissing her concerns earlier about like, well, he has never hit me, but that doesn't mean he hasn't like hit the walls around you or erupted out of nowhere for no good reason in a basic conversation or threat like that. Like there's a threat right there. Hey, in some South American countries, it's legal to kill your wife if she insults you.
I mean, I think it's a really important scene because we've tipped over to, he's been threatening before, but now we realize, actually, this is your major scene. This is another major scene where the audience should be, where the movie is telling you to not identify.
Yeah, I'm out.
Because now he's really, now he's threatening to murder his wife. That actually is what he's doing in this scene. And it's, he's this fully on, the shooter reference, which is not one that would have existed at that time, the mass shooter reference is so strong at this point.
Yeah.
So like that's a really interesting scene, and this is when she calls the cops for the second time, and the woman cop comes and totally dismisses this.
Right.
And just says, make sure cops are funded more. Like it's
right. Yeah.
There's another scene right around here which is not involving his journey, and I want to break the cycle, and but we should probably mention the interactions with his mother.
Yeah, I think that is right around here. So at this point, you've got Detective Torres, who is Robert Duvall's former partner, Latina woman who got like the racist treatment from the surplus store owner when he was hiding Michael Douglas in the dressing room while saying, no, I haven't seen this guy. She now actually goes out with Duvall's character, and they find out who Defense is, and they find that he's living with his mother. And so they go to talk to his mother, and that's when they find out a few things functionally about Defense, that like he hasn't been. Wait, is this where we find out that he's unemployed, that he's been fired?
Well, no, they actually have to tell his mother because they've called. They've called his.
Oh, they've called where he works, right? So they find out. But the interesting thing in this scene, actually, I find, is that Robert Duvall's character, you find like this guy's actually probably a good detective. He can talk to people, and he gets the mom who doesn't want to talk to them at all and doesn't like them being in the house. He connects with her very quickly.
So this is sort of his portrayal of masculinity, which is interesting, is that he is a careful and empathetic person.
Yeah.
Is he a detective? I don't think he's that high ranking.
The cast list lists him as a sergeant.
As a sergeant, okay. So he's not a detective. He's a sergeant. He's a sergeant, but you can see him being a quote good cop because he's unlike every other cop in the film, other than his partner to a certain degree.
Yeah.
He's both smart and empathetic and understanding, which I think at the end of the movie, I want to talk about finally how they deal with the situation with his wife, because throughout the movie, yes, he's henpecked or that she's like out of control, but he's very understanding of that, and he loves her. And he understands why she's having these difficulties with both dealing with the loss of the child that in some ways she didn't want, and also with the loss of her youth and not having anything else in her life and wanting some level of control. So like he's really understanding. And he shows that again in this scene. He empathizes with the mother. But what we find out is the mother's terrified of him too.
Right.
This is someone who is completely has been just getting worse and worse. He's out of control, and that he's been laid off for over a month, and that's why there's nothing in his briefcase. It's why his shoe is worn out. It's why everything, his defense contractor job. One thing about the early 90s that may seem very strange right now is this is a period of major demobilization and defense cuts.
Oh, right.
And I mean, which is reversed with the war on terror and will probably never be reversed again as the rate that they're going. Like that just gets set in. But actually, this is a period where there's major defense cuts. And it seems like he may have been fired just because he's who he is.
I don't imagine this personality type is like a cool, calm, easy to work with coworker at work and just saves his temper for home.
Yeah. So like we sort of get the full image of this person in which every bit of his self-image of what he's supposed to be has been stripped away. I mean, I think the reason we're sort of doing this scene is just that it gives that last bit.
It does, yeah. But it also shows you what kind of police officer Robert Duvall's character is, which I think is kind of interesting. And like you said, in comparison with the way everybody else around him, no matter what department they're in, because he sees a wide swath of cops in his last day at work. Because people are stopping by to like basically make fun of him for retiring and being a desk jockey.
And this is another interesting, thing I think the movie does well is there's this ribbing, which normally would be like they're doing pranks that are friendly to a colleague who's leaving.
Yeah.
Right? But there's an edge to them, and it comes out. There's a point where they have a office party. Well, we'll get to this actually, but basically it's like, but it's not like, because there's an edge of like, of meanness that wouldn't be there if they're actually mocking him. They're not.
He's not retiring because of age. Because I mean, Robert Duvall, we think of now as an older guy. Like he's not that old in this particular movie. He's retiring because like it's the sanity of his wife and trying to save their relationship.
Right.
And he needs to get out of this profession. Which is why he's a wuss. That's why everybody's making fun of him.
Right. Which he'll deal with that.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, God, the cops really suck. They're incompetent. They don't listen. Yeah, well,
gasp of realization there. What?
I know. So what's our next scene with Douglas? Because
we got a couple more just going through the Douglas chain of events here, as far as like the video gamification of the story for Douglas. The next beef that he has, and I think part of my kind of quandary of analyzing this film is I'm not sure these scenes are in the right order. Because post surplus store scene, we get a scene of overt comedy in my book. He starts hassling a construction worker out working on the streets, and he demands from this construction worker, who's literally one of those guys, like, I'm just doing I do street repair. They say they go repair this, I go do it.
I mean, the guy's an asshole. He's not friendly when you question him.
Oh, why would he be? You're bugging him at work.
Right.
Hey, where do you think you're going? You can't come this way.
What are you doing to the street?
We're fixing it. What the hell does it look like?
2 days ago it was fine. You telling me the street fell apart in 2 days?
Well, I guess so.
Pardon me, but that's bullshit. I want to know what's wrong with the street. See, I don't think anything's wrong with the street. I think you're just trying to justify your inflated budgets.
What are you, nuts?
No, I know how it works. If you don't spend the money you have projected this year, they won't give you the same amount next year. Now, I want you to admit there's nothing wrong with the street.
Fuck you, pal, huh?
You're not gonna hold us hostage here with these yellow lights and all these big trucks.
I don't know. My sympathies are not with Douglas, so by default, I kind of just go with whoever else he's in a scene with, unless it's a white supremacist, then obviously no. But in this scene, he's asking a guy doing street repair, what's wrong with the streets? He wants this guy to justify why the city is spending the money to fix the street when the street was fine. And we're going with Michael Douglas's word here. This is not an area he lives in or drives through. So I don't believe the streets maybe were fine a minute ago. This is an area he drives by maybe on his commute, but whatever. And so this guy, like, he makes him justify why they're fixing the streets right now.
So, but this is another scene, once again, of the angry tax-paying man.
Right.
Angry ode man. Because what he's saying is, I know how this works. You need to do this to justify your budgets. You don't actually have to do any repairs. This is corruption. There's
Otherwise,
no
you're not going to get money
reason
for next year. You got to spend it.
Right. Why is there just another obstacle in my way to doing the things that I want to do? Why is the world not this perfect, idyllic thing that is open to me and what I want and what a man should be?
Oh,
and
that's right. Because the inconvenience here is that he has to like cross the street and walk on the other sidewalk and not right here where he wanted to.
So once again, this is like, to me, I'm calling it sort of Reaganite, even though we're in the 90s, because I think it's the same thing, but it's Reaganite masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another example of that. The system is broken, and it's specifically going after the little guy, and he's the little guy. But what he does is he takes out the rocket launcher, and then a child, and we're just going to point out, the child is black. This is the other black character in the film who's mentioned, once again, empathizing with him.
Well, it's a child who sees a guy with a rocket launcher and he's not terrified. He's just like, oh, cool. The way like a child might be. You're like, oh my God, I've only seen those in the movies. And then Michael Douglas doesn't even know how to use it. He wants to blow up the street here. And so the child then he's like, oh, I've seen movies. Like, here's how you, and then he instructs him on how to fire a rocket launcher into the sewer and blow up this work project.
But he thinks he's on a movie set. Like he thinks they're shooting.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
But this is also, I think there's a little bit of social commentary on the unreality, right? The degree to which we're wrapped up in, popular entertainment with violence to the point at which children know how to use rocket launchers for movies, but also that they just assume that it's LA, but like
it's LA. Yeah, I was going to say.
But that, it's an unreal moment. There's a bit of social commentary there as well, I think.
Oh, for sure. And then also it's done it felt to me like it was totally done as a comedic scene.
Yeah, it's a gag.
And the gag is he shoots the rocket launcher, it goes into the hole where they've been working on like the sewer or whatever it was, and then it blows up like down the block. I was like, this was not the only dude on the work site. People are dead here.
I mean, you don't see anybody die. You see them running.
But come on.
Yeah. I think they almost don't show anybody dying to keep him.
To keep your sympathies on the side of defense, I think, here.
I mean, we've lost his sympathies completely.
We're laughing with him now. Isn't that hilarious? Everybody hates road construction.
Well, but this is where it's so confused. And this is where you're saying the order's wrong, because at this point, we're actually reaching a high level of tension in which we know that this person has totally lost it. They, in fact, do not have a job. They don't have anything. And they're basically going to potentially kill their wife and child, or their ex-wife and child.
Right.
That is actually what's happening. So we're well beyond the point at which the movie is actually trying to sympathize with him. Or if not sympathize with him, the movie is always empathizing with him, but he's not justified in any way by this point. And yet we have another one of his, endless journeys. And it just, in real life, things are at random. They're not totally at random, but feel as if they're at random. Sure. But movies, unless that's very intentional, and I don't think this movie pulls that off, don't do things at random. There's a mark. So, all right. So then the next scene.
The next scene ends up being the country club, where we actually do see him kill somebody, but not technically. So you could still be on board with this guy for a second. He goes to a golf course.
What the hell?
Oh, it must be the groundskeeper.
Well, if he is, he's out of uniform. Hey, you there! What are you doing there?
Just passing through.
Nobody said you could play through. Get off my hole!
Oh, Frank, he said he was passing through.
He's not even a member. Look at the way he's dressed, for Christ's sake. Would you get off my golf course?
I am.
He is.
Go back the way you came!
Frank, listen, I don't like the looks of this guy. Leave him alone, will you?
Listen, what am I paying my fucking dues for? This is my golf course. If I want to play here, I will play here, you understand? If he gets hit with my Titleist, that's his fucking problem.
Don't yell at me. I'm just here playing with you, for Christ's sake. That's the ball. You want to...
4! 4!
Five! Wait a minute. Whoa. What the hell are you trying to do? Kill me with a golf ball? Is that enough? You got all these beautiful acres fenced in for your little game, but you gotta kill me with a golf ball? You should have children playing here. You should have families having picnics. You should have a goddamn petting zoo. Instead, you got these stupid electric carts for you old men with nothing better to do?
Frank, what's wrong, Frank? Frank! Frankie, okay?
Aren't you ashamed of yourself?
Oh my God! I gotta get some
What's
help.
wrong with you?
Help!
Your heart?
Help!
Something's wrong with your heart? What can I do? Pills? Where are your pills? Well, I guess you're out of luck, aren't you? Your little cart's going to drown. Now, aren't you sorry you didn't let me pass through your golf course?
Hey, golf.
Yeah. And now you're going to die wearing that stupid little hat. How does it feel?
Now, I got to say, I am very anti golf courses. What a waste of money and resources and whatever else. But I'm not going to go to the point where like I'm going to carry weapons and assault somebody on a golf course just by pulling out a gun. Because again, guns are the answer to everything for defense. Now that he has the whole thing, he has a whole big rant against golf courses. Whether or not I agree with that, that's fine. Again, it's kind of like stand-up comedy from the 90s again. Just by brandishing a weapon, this guy has a heart attack and is presumably like dies right here on the golf course. His golf course.
So this is all right. So this scene I think is also interesting as a sympathy scene, specifically, because there's a class politics here.
Sure.
So these are wealthy men who take up inordinate space with their sport away from everything. Taking land that could be put for public use.
Yeah,
that is openly what defense says. This should be a park.
This should be
for children playing. This should be one for people like me, because he's openly identifying as. It's an interesting thing because it's a combination of sort of the working stiff, but he's not a manual worker. So I would say he is he's a part of the working class, but the specifically culturally middle class one, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, with to a certain degree a suburbanite attitude,
sure.
But in fact is a wage worker. Or he might be salaried. He's in the office, but so part of it is he's saying something. This is one of the points where the identification, because this is the scene where he's saying something that really makes fucking sense, and it's not a right wing talking point actually.
Right.
When sort of calling this Reaganite masculinity and senses of entitlement, but this is also a sense of like a broader societal good which is being taken away by rich fat cats.
Well, and I'm referencing stand-up comedy. This is a George Carlin bit from the late 80s, early 90s, golf courses for the homeless, where he has rants about golf courses. He's cribbing like some of what he's even saying, like from stand-up comedy bits.
I know where we can build housing for the homeless. Golf courses. Perfect. Golf courses. Just what we need. Just what we need. Plenty of good land in nice neighborhoods, land that is currently being wasted on a meaningless, mindless activity engaged in primarily by white, well-to-do male businessmen who use the game to get together to make deals to carve this country up a little finer among themselves. I am getting tired, really getting tired of these golfing cocksuckers in their green pants and their yellow pants and their orange pants and their precious little hats and their cute little golf carts. It is time to reclaim the golf courses from the wealthy and turn them over to the homeless. Golf is an arrogant, elitist game, and it takes up entirely too much room in this country. Too much room in this country.
Wow. So he is the squeezed middle class, the traditional base of fascism.
And that's what I'm saying. It pulls you kind of, or at least me too. I was like, okay, I'm not as being pushed away by this character in this particular context. I don't necessarily think you should be like wandering around a golf course with a gun threatening people. Like it could have been, like you said, any given scene from here on out past the surplus store could be a scene of him just actually breaking and doing a mass shooting.
I mean, part of it is at the end, we're going to have to, when the revolution comes, and I'm not even really, we're going to, one way or another, we're going to have to get rid of the golf courses.
That's fine. But it's one of these where I was like, it's two bits of comedy after like the white nationalist Nazi scene structurally put in the movie here in order to pull some of our sympathies back with this guy.
Well, and the next scene is going to get even more so, but actually I think it's the reason it tonally is weird is because we've actually gotten to the point where killing the Nazi in self-defense is one thing. Threatening to kill your wife, your ex-wife.
Right.
that we're well past this point, right? We're well past the point where, oh, well, he is sort of making some sense as something that really is how you should be playing this. And yet it becomes very confused. All of these should have happened before.
Right. Also, after the street scene with the rocket launcher, where we didn't see it, but presumably people died in this scene too because he shot a rocket launcher at a construction site. Now we're at a country club. Guy dies of a heart attack right in front of him, just walks away.
But part of it is, I would say it should happen before, but you need a good length of time afterwards to build tension. And this does actually, the time that you spend on this builds tension as he's slowly transforming. So I think it's just you need to do this differently.
Again, it's just the kind of tonal mess that we get in some of these scenes.
Right. So then he gets out of the golf course by climbing over a fence with barbed wire that cuts himself and gets to a mansion.
Gun in hand,
and in fatigues, right?
Yeah,
and finds a family who's actually a family who works for the plastic surgeon who owns the mansion, and they're having a cookout, which it seems like they don't actually have permission to do. They're
regardless. Like the groundskeeper says, that he's like, "Oh no, the doctor lets us hang out."
Yeah, but he's freaked out because he thinks he's going to get in trouble.
Well, he's also probably freaked out because there's a dude in fatigues with a gun who just hopped the fence.
Well, that's primarily what he's freaked out about. But it's at first is that we're going to get in trouble. Then, as you hear the cops coming and Defense runs for it, he takes the family and he grabs the little girl.
Yeah, grabs her arm, and they all kind of like hide in what looks like a little like garage alcove or something.
Please take me with you.
No.
They won't do anything as long as I'm with you. Just please let them go.
What do you think? You think I want to hurt your family? I have a family of my own. You don't believe me?
We believe you.
That's where I'm going. I'm going home to see my family. It's my little girl's birthday today. We were gonna have a barbecue like you guys. And, she was gonna play outside, and my wife hold my hand, talk about grown-up things. And then when it got dark, we'd all go to sleep together. We'd all sleep together in the dark. And everything would be just like it was before.
And this is part of the psychology around his own child, right? Like he's missing his child. He possessively missing his child.
Sure.
The idealization of his child. But those emotions are very real. Douglas brings them across as a parent, but as a broken mask, sort of toxic masculinist parent.
Yeah.
And this is another scene where basically he realizes he's holding the child too hard and that the child is freaking out. And also there's blood on her from his hand and lets her go.
Well, it's interesting. There's a negotiation here, which is I think, like you mentioned, his performance. I think his performance in this scene is just as good as in the fast food scene, because he's also kind of in negotiations with the father of the kid here, the dad, the groundskeeper.
Right.
And the dad clearly just wants his family to be safe. And there's a guy in fatigues who just climbed over a barbed wire fence, who's bleeding, bitching about why there's barbed wire here. He's got a gun in his hand. He has a bag full of guns. And he's holding on to his daughter. He just wants his daughter back. And then there's an interesting point where Defense realizes when he lets go of the daughter's hand, he's like, "Oh, wait, what do you think? You think I want to hurt your family?" Like he's shocked by this revelation. We're like, that's what you are doing.
It's so the reason it gives Douglas more to work with. It's another scene where he thinks people should empathize with him immediately.
Right.
And so these are like, I think, the strongest scenes in getting across what he is and sort of getting the particulars of what he is. And then but this, unlike in this fast food scene, he realizes what's happening because there's a child involved and because of his own child. And then he explains, so they ask whose house this is. It's a plastic surgeon. Oh, plastic surgery pays for this. Something like plastic surgery. It's another absurdity. And this is where he says, he uses the phrase from earlier.
A doctor lives here? What kind of doctor lives here?
It's a plastic surgeon.
Plastic surgery bought all this? Guess I'm in the wrong racket. There are correspondence courses in plastic surgery. I lost my job. Well, actually, I didn't lose it. It lost me. I'm overeducated, underskilled. Maybe it's the other way around, I forget. But I'm obsolete. I'm not economically viable.
I'm no longer economically viable. And it's the one where he says he's either overeducated, what is it? I'm overeducated or underskilled, or the other way around.
Oh, wait, yeah, or maybe it's the other way around.
He talks about losing his job. This is the scene where we get the full picture of who he is and what, desperately how much he wants what this family is. That's what he's supposed to have. Why doesn't he have this? He's lost his he's lost his family. He's lost his job. He's lost everything that's supposed to make him what he is. And this is the scene where it's brought home sort of dramatically. Mm-hmm. And partially through, once again, another contrast with the absurdity of how the wealthy get wealthy when someone like me gets screwed.
Right.
Which is not commentary that, I can agree with, actually. But it works better to me because you have people terrified to contrast him with, as opposed to the absurdities of, like, we realize why this person is dangerous and why what he demands is absurd because he wants to bend his family into his own image as opposed to them being actual people with autonomy. Right. And the movie makes that clear. That's when we don't sympathize with him. Whenever it's not his family and it's just the problems of daily life, then you could think of this as a social satire where it's over the top, but actually he's right. But the plastic surgeon thing, he's right, but also, like, you did this to yourself. And I guess that is part of the contradiction.
Yeah. Which I think makes it interesting but messy to me.
Yes.
Which I guess that I should say that for my final thoughts. But it's interesting, like you said, trying to warp the family to be what he wants them to be in the image. I think I referenced earlier, like he wants a magazine image of, like, the American dream for, right heterosexual family.
Yeah.
And he's forcing it to happen to the point where, you're not even recognizing that your wife and your daughter are human beings with their own wants and desires and interests because they're not yours, and you're trying to force that. We actually get to see that in the very next scene because he arrives home with a bag of guns. He hasn't dropped the guns. He's also, we didn't mention it, but he's lost the snow globe. I think the Nazi broke it or something, so he doesn't have the gift anymore. But when he arrives home with a bag of guns, they run out the back. He comes in the front and he starts watching old home movies. Specifically an old birthday party celebration. It's really fascinating because it's what you just described about how, like, it's what he wants to have versus what actually is happening. He's forcing his daughter to the point where she's crying on his birthday to, like, play with a toy and mug for the home video camera because he wants these, like, happy family moments when, like, that's actually not the moment you're living in right now.
Right. Well, kids cry, especially on their birthdays, because they get overloaded.
Oh, sure. Especially when your dad's an asshole and he's, like, making you, like, no, be happy. Get on the present I just gave you and enjoy it.
Right. Because it's not, it's not actually for her because she's not a person. She's just something that's supposed to be part of this. Sitting there. He's sitting there next to the puppy that he gave her. And it's part of it. I mean, you see him reacting to this. You think maybe there's a moment of realization. By the way, the like the ice cream shop has become, that he was talking about, that he's calling from, becomes some sort of new age bullshit, right? Like it's one.
Oh, right. Total LA thing.
Yeah, but it's one more dislocation from the image, right?
Yeah.
But he's sitting there, and this is also for the audience where we, once again really see the dynamic of what he was and why this didn't right. But he represents the patriarchal father figure who is supposed to have control over his family and be able to, and he has lost that. He cannot have that. The world is spiraling out of control.
Well, the video, him watching the home videos too, is kind of really cracked open a chunk of this movie for me, where it was like the his reality versus the actual reality narrative that's going on. Because as he's watching it, like you were saying, I'm empathetic to the human emotion I'm seeing on the screen, which is a child, like, not enjoying their birthday and being harassed by a parent. And the wife is even like, dude, tone it down. Or, she's kind of playing to the camera a little bit because it is a home movie and there is a camera on. But she's trying to like kind of quell it a little bit. So you get a little sample of the dynamic that she was talking about earlier to the cops, where she was like, well, no, he's never hit me, but I'm like, well, here's one of those butt scenes. And it's not the worst because he's not like physically abusive or threatening even verbally in this, but it's more like this guy's a bully in his own house. This sucks. And as he's watching it, he is not realizing I'm the asshole in this video. He's watching it, I thought, very like kind of nostalgic, like, oh, this is what I wanted for today. I want another birthday with my kid.
Well, so
did you read it that way, or am I just reading too much into that?
So part of it is, I mean, I think the scene is even more hostile. So like she literally picks up the child and pulls the child away from him.
In the video.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm saying, but his reaction watching the video wasn't like learning a lesson or like, oh shit, I'm being an asshole here. It felt to me like he was watching it the way Chevy Chase watches the home movies in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Like it's, oh, the good old days kind of thing.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think at first I thought there was something revelatory going on. I think he's seeing how he lost his family, but he can't actually deal with that because this is someone who cannot deal with the actual reality.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's watching this home movie is almost like the good old days, the way you or I would watch a home movie and be like, oh man, that was a good time or something.
I'm trying to remember. I think on his face you can see when things turn bad. He realizes this isn't actually what he wanted. But I don't think he can deal with that. So how eventually are you going to?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. However, he's watching the home videos. It doesn't, that may be up for debate. Maybe he is learning a little lesson here. He doesn't act like he learns any kind of lesson in the finale here. But before we get to the finale and before the cops arrive on the scene, we have an exchange with Robert Duvall and his wife, played by Tuesday Weld, in the police station before he heads out to with Detective Torres to confront Defense, where it's like a confrontation between Duvall and his wife here, where he ends up, I guess, quote unquote, becoming a man or standing up to her at this point, where he yells to her into the phone, shut up, have dinner ready for me when I get home, and leave the skin on the chicken. And then he goes out to be a cop.
So this is what I mean about this movie not actually rejecting traditional masculinity, right? The thing that it's critiquing in Defense, it basically says is good in Duvall's character.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of another 90s element to it, of a movie that like would have been a 70s movie where you would have a hard ending where there's a complex thing happening. Instead has a pat happy ending.
Right.
In which he shows up that bitch, basically.
Yeah. He's finally being a man of the house.
Right. Except that part of it is he's built up through his empathetic character. It's a complete contradiction, right? It's totally flubbing his arc. Why he actually is taking this position, and obviously it's not a good relationship, and yes, there needs to be a real conversation about what he wants also, and it's not great, but she actually has reasons for doing what she's doing.
Yeah.
And instead they completely go with the man of the house, and that he is the man of the house and that he needs to stand up. And so they completely say all the things that Defense wanted are actually okay as long as you like
don't ask for it with a gun.
Don't ask for a gun. Or I don't know. Actually, I think they kind of like they totally fuck their beans. Yeah. It's a mess. I mean, yes, we see why Defense does it because he's, Duvall has built up sympathy through being empathetic, and now he's finally standing up to himself in this one scene.
Right, which is a scene where I was kind of like, well, I'm kind of out on this character. One, it didn't seem true to the character, and it just seemed like, why are you doing this? Oh, because you need a quick wrap up.
Because you need a quick wrap up, and you want it to be a fist pumper for the audience.
Part of the audience, a certain part of the audience, sure, yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's
you and I weren't pumping our fists when that scene happened. I don't think.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same issues throughout the film.
Yeah, for sure.
It is that is supposed to be a fist pumper moment.
Yep.
And then he goes. The party, the surprise party happens at the exact wrong time, and he's him and his partner are going to
go the retirement party.
Right. The retirement party, and they've got a retirement party going, and he's like, I have to go. And it's like, what? You're going to go be an actual cop? And the cop who's been the most obnoxious throughout the film makes a comment about his wife, and he decks the guy. So he's both shown his masculinity to the other cops.
That's true. And to his wife.
So all of this sort of
decks him right into his retirement cake.
Which is very symbolic. So it's like, I still love my wife. Also, my wife will do what I say. And I'm actually like,
I've regained my manhood. I can punch people now. I can put my wife in her place.
and I can go out and get the bad guy. And
Yeah.
it's like all of your nuanced work
out the window.
I do think this is sort of a 90s sort of thing.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Well, then also coming up here, because so he heads out and they get to the Barbara Hershey's house, the ex-wife's house, and Defense is there, but Detective Torres and Robert Duvall both go. I forget who goes where, but one goes in the front, one goes in the back. I think Detective Torres goes in the back because Michael Douglas, he hears them coming. He runs out the back and shoots a cop. He shoots Detective Torres. I think it's like a gut shot or in the inner side.
Yeah, it's
not fatal, but yeah. But now he has also shot a cop, and then he runs to the pier because I guess apparently that's also where his wife and daughter ran to. I don't know why they ran to the pier. If there's like a nostalgic value to that, it seems like you'd be trapped if you're trying to get away from your violent ex. Why run to a pier? But whatever. I'm not second guessing her. She's in a panic mode. She's running for her safety, and we get the final confrontation now between wife, daughter, Defense, and Robert Duvall's cop.
So, one little detail is Robert Duvall had already given up his gun, so he doesn't.
Oh, right, he's already turned it in.
Right, so he has to. He gets his partner's gun and puts it in his holster. As she's. So that's another symbolic. This is also the other very 90s, like, you flub the ending because actually this is dumb. Which is, it's just lazy writing. So basically, Defense figures out where they are because this is a place that she liked. And it's also within, you can see it from the house.
I'll say they're in Venice. So like it's right outside their front door.
It's right outside their front door. Why would you possibly run here? I don't care about panic. I don't care about anything. It makes literally no sense that she would go there.
The script told you to.
It's bad. It's a bullshit script move.
Yeah.
Lazy.
It's lazy.
The way of ending it. You get a foot chase. He catches up to them. And, we see all of his desperation to be the father and the husband, and her trying to protect her child and the child not really understanding what's going on.
I think also you can see. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But I'm picturing this is when we're finally seeing the dynamic as has played out previously in their relationship and why they're divorced.
I mean, and it's culminating in his inability to deal with this, and then Duvall runs up. He doesn't have his gun out. He starts just by
chatting. Like, isn't he? Is he like eating fries or
popcorn?
Popcorn. Yeah, he's got popcorn here. We should also note too that just for the sake of what's going to pay off here, when Michael Douglas is at the house, when Defense is at the house on his own watching the home videos, he picks up the toy blue squirt gun that his daughter has been kind of playing with in the background this whole time.
So part of it is this is Duvall's character actually on display because what he's doing is he's empathizing.
Yeah, same as he did with Defense's mom when they went to visit. Like
right.
He's doing that. I don't have my gun out. Michael Douglas, by the way, does have a gun in his hand. He's got a handgun with him.
And so part of it is we haven't emphasized very much, but this is actually essential to Duvall's character is that he's lost a child. He has lost that. Right. These are both men who have lost this ideal family form in various ways. And Duvall is empathizing and talking about how absolutely precious this is. And he gives the popcorn to the child and he sort of maneuvers Defense into putting down the gun for a second, like not just by distracting him enough.
He's trying to connect with the humanity of the moment.
Right. He's connecting with the humanity of the moment to disarm him. But it's, it's where all the parallel themes of them as fathers and masculine figures sort of come together.
Well, there's still the part of the back and forth is like,
what are we gonna do?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Oh, guys like you always say you don't know what you're gonna do until you do it. I think you know exactly what you were gonna do. You were gonna kill your wife and child.
Oh.
Yeah. And then you knew it would be too late to turn back. It would be real easy to turn the gun around on yourself. Now let's go meet some nice policemen. They're good guys. Come on, let's go.
I'm the bad guy?
Yeah.
How'd that happen? I did everything they told me to. Did you know I build missiles?
Yeah.
I helped to protect America? You should be rewarded for that. Instead they give it to the plastic surgeon. They lied to me.
Is that what this is about? You're angry because you got lied to? Is that why my chicken dinner's drying out in the oven? Hey, they lie to everybody. They lie to the fish. But that doesn't give you any special right to do what you did today. The only thing that makes you special is that little girl. Now let's go. Let's go!
Duvall does say at one point in a very calm way, he's like, you're sick. And then Douglas is like, no, this town is sick, which is kind of interesting. Like, is it the environment or the individual? What is really the grievance here? He's kind of de-escalating defense in a very interesting way, which allows the wife to kick away the gun. And then there's this realization, or maybe it is actually after Duvall does draw his gun, that Michael Douglas says like, wait, I'm the bad guy?
Yes.
How did that happen? I did everything they told me to. I built missiles and protected America.
Yeah, I did everything I told it to. They lied to me. And Duvall basically is like, yeah, of course they did.
Right.
Everybody has to deal with that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean this is okay. And the other thing Duvall says is, let's be clear about what you were going to do. You were going to kill your wife and child, and then you were going to kill yourself. That is what you were going to do. Don't pretend that's not what you were going to do.
Right.
And Duvall, defense doesn't really disagree.
Well, in fact, he doesn't disagree to the point where he even tells Duvall, like, I think you mentioned earlier with like the psyche of these kind of like mass shooter types that this movie is looking at, or potential for a mass shooting event here with this character, that there is a suicidal element there.
Yeah.
And Douglas specifically says like he has a gun in his pocket. He doesn't say it's the squirt gun. He says, I have a gun in the pocket. So now, I don't know, there's like a realization here where he's like, all right, suicide by cops, just how I'm going out now.
That is 100% it. He's doing what a mass shooter does.
Yeah.
Which it's a suicide by cop. And, Duvall, shoots him in self-defense. It's totally justifiable, right? Because you only have a split second. You don't.
Yeah, he says he's drawing a gun. Yeah,
he's throwing a gun, even though it's a blue squirt gun, but you only have seconds to react.
Well, and the way the film shows you too, you're not seeing Michael Douglas pulling out and see, like, there's no confirmation you visually see the blue gun until he's over the edge floating in the water.
Well, because part of it is he sets it up as a draw, like an old Western draw.
Right.
Like a Western movie draw. It's totally...
Yeah, no commentary on masculinity there.
None at all. None at all on American culture. Not at all on sort of...
mythology of the West and everything else.
Frankly, the baby boomer experience at a certain level. I don't know. It's like, everything is there. You have that, and then just to say, like, the final scene basically is Duvall confirming, telling off his boss in front of the new basically he gets its credit from his boss for doing this. He tells off his asshole boss in front of the news crews.
Such a fucking 90s thing, like you were saying, another 90s trope. Like, for some reason, when he like the news is there live talking to the boss, like, oh, and the hero here is Sergeant Pendergrass, so say a few words. He's like, go fuck yourself or whatever. It's totally that moment in Die Hard when like Bonnie Belinda, Holly McClane, when they're finally rescued again to Die Hard, and she decks the news guy like live on TV. You're like, good God, okay, there's these tropes we got to do because it's the 90s apparently.
Right. But also he makes it clear he's not retiring, and his wife is just gonna...
you're right, because he's a man now. He's got his mojo back. He's put his wife in her place.
And part of it is because he is, even we're not totally rejecting his empathetic side. It's the combination of the two that makes him total, because of course part of it is defense is too extreme, so he lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't able to deal with... Part of it is he wasn't able to deal with the fact that like reality sucks and that you're going to get screwed over.
Right.
So,
and Duvall was clearly retiring because his wife wanted to, not because he wanted to. He kept talking about how he doesn't want to be in Arizona or whatever shithole they were moving to. It was never like his choice. Now, like, apparently his arc turned out to be like, he needs to be totally in control of the house and be his own little fascist in the household.
Right. So part of, he's the actual, he's how this actually works out with both assertiveness and also empathy, whereas defense was not balanced. But maybe that's giving this more coherence than it deserves, because it's...
Well, I think there's a coherence that comes with it because like it's so wrapped up with a fucking bow at the end. It may not make sense as far as like character arcs and screenplay and themes go, but it gives you the kind of like generic satisfaction of a Hollywood ending in the 90s.
Yeah. I think, well, part of it is Douglas's character has the tragic ending that actually does fit. And then, though, with some more sympathy, but also his fucked upness in there. And Duvall's character, is the one who sort of, if this was a 70s movie, they could have done this. But by the 90s, we don't want to deal with this. We don't want to deal with the fact that like there's going to be a nuanced and complicated ending.
So there's a quote from the screenwriter that actually goes exactly what you're saying there, Isaac. Ebro Smith, who wrote it, said what he thought the movie was about. To me, even though the movie deals with complicated urban issues, it's really just about one basic thing. The main character represents the old power structure of the U.S. and has now become archaic and hopelessly lost. For both of them, it's adjust or die time. So I think it's interesting that he says for both of them there. But based on the ending and the way we're reading it, the adjust or die time, like, okay, well, one of them dies, and then Robert Duvall then adjusts to a new power structure?
I mean, that's the problem is Robert Duvall's. So Defense totally represents that. He represents Cold War America. He represents a changing world. Totally works. That part works. Duvall is something totally different. He is wrestling with the same forms of family and masculinity that Defense is, but he's not in the same. He has a more nuanced, complicated arc that doesn't fit within the same framework. No, I mean, none of that stuff, none of that works because the cops in the film are the way the cops always are. They're not a new structure at all.
Right.
He doesn't fit in with them because he's too much of like a human being. And he doesn't ever lose that humanity, even when he becomes more macho, I guess.
Right.
And so that's where he can fit in better because he's more balanced in the fucked up context that he is. But he's not dealing in any way with what the screenwriter is saying, I don't think.
I don't think so either. That's why I think, like we said, kind of at the top of the show, it's an interesting kind of mess, even though there are certain scenes that really, I think, do kind of hit out of the park that are really fascinating, interesting, and well done. It's just overall, it ends up being kind of like messy and also undercuts its own message that it's been building towards, and then isn't successful in sticking the landing.
Yeah. Wow. So,
I would still recommend watching it if anybody hasn't seen it. I mean, we pretty much, spoiled the entire thing, so there's not gonna be a lot to discover within that. But I think it's an interesting mess.
That's just it. It's a really interesting mess.
Yeah,
I think this is what makes this stuff interesting. I mean, I think it's a really interesting bit of its moment and also of multiple one that fits with our moment very well in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, currently, it's interesting how much. And I didn't even get into too much of it, but just as a contemporary audience, taking some notes while I was watching it, I was like, oh, this really, I mean, so maybe it is really much more effective than I'm giving it credit for as a screenplay, where like, I think it's maybe unintentionally tapping into something that isn't articulated very precisely or well at times within the movie, but is tapping into something that does transcend even just the time period it was made in.
Yeah.
So,
well, what it's tapping into is fucked up.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, it's not like it's a great, reflection of American society, but it's clearly still there and is as reflective now, if not maybe even more so than the way it was. And maybe, is it one of those where like it maybe did play more as a broad, like black comedy when it came out versus now there's just so much reality to it that you're like, oh God. And it loses some of that satire sting, or no, maybe not the satire sting, but like the comic value of it.
Yeah.
Because I've talked to several people that have seen this movie or saw the movie back in the day or more closely when it came out that always mentioned like, oh my God, it's hilarious, to me at least. And I was like, I don't think I laughed. I think I laughed at the rocket launcher maybe because I was just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, no, it's this is one that, I mentioned the American History X problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is even more confused than that because that movie, if I remember correctly, clearly rejects Nazis. They just look cool.
Well, they spend an hour making them look cool, and then by the end,
they're supposed to be bad.
Full rejection of it, yeah.
This is a movie where they try. Maybe if they're trying to reject this, they don't pull it off. But actually, from what the screenwriter says, their actual thing is that they have deep sympathy for these positions. At the same time that they're trying to say this isn't. I mean, it's just a mess.
Yeah, and I think what was really throwing me for a loop mentally, where I was like, I'm really trying to kind of parse through this movie in my head. It's the fact that I can't shake the feeling that there's a tone here where he has legitimate grievances and complaints. And like you said, there are moments where like, fuck the rich and the plastic surgeon and the golf course. And like, there are those moments like, yeah, even I am connecting there, but I don't know. I have conflicting feelings even within those scenes of like how it's being, maybe it's like the way that that's being addressed through like an armed, fatigued vigilante killing people as he wanders through the streets or so. I don't know. Maybe if it was Snake Plissken doing this and it was more like John Carpenter, obviously like heightened, like alternate reality or something, it would work better for me. But I don't know.
It reminds me of watching, what is it, Abel Ferrara movie?
Oh,
like, what is it, like King of the City or something? Where it's like, well, it's the 90s problem that I was bringing up, where it's like, you're trying to do a 70s crime movie to a certain degree, but it's a 90s crime movie, which means it's silly. It's Godfather 3 with the helicopter assault. It's like none of the earlier movies would ever, they've had plenty of violence, but that's just that over the top 90s-ness of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The Ferrara one, King of New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. That actually, I mean, well, I don't think we're going to, but that may even fall in with our kind of summer theme here of the American urban landscape.
Yeah, I don't really want to do that.
No, but because we have something else we're doing for next time.
Yeah.
What are we up to on our next episode, Isaac, for folks that want to watch ahead of us thoroughly ruining by going through scene by scene an entire movie?
Which I don't think we're going to probably do again. I think we did it for this one because of, like you said, the structure. And the way
it built like kind of, I had the video game analysis going through the whole way where like it just built like level after level, scene after scene. It escalated in a very specific way that I think provided commentary for us along with the film itself. But
so this is a political podcast, and somehow we haven't done a John Sayles movie in the, how long have we been doing this?
3 years, 3.5,
2, but whatever. Yeah, we're getting into the third summer. Our third.
We're in
summer.
our third year. Sorry.
Yeah, we're in our third year. And we haven't done a John Sayles movie, and that is wild. I think we've talked about The Return of Secaucus 7. So in keeping with our theme, and John Sayles could have a number of movies probably that fit into this.
All of them. Oh, you mean the urban?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant politics.
Yeah. And well, not on that. We're keeping the parallel here. We're probably going to break the parallel. Maybe we'll do 2 pairs. But another early 90s movie, we're going to look at 1991's City of Hope.
Which is one of those, if you want to watch along, you can pay to do a digital rental, but I'm, as of this recording, I'm not finding it on DVD to purchase anywhere. I like owning, especially ones we're talking about here, because you never know what great DVD special features you may find there. So if I can scrounge one up before we record, Isaac, I will be buying this off of DVD to see what's there. But another one of those lost to streaming. Nobody wants to stream John Sayles movies. Probably not going to get too many clicks on those, but his filmography is very, very lacking in the streaming world, and very limited on home video releases as well, which sucks. But
yep.
Looking forward to jumping. Actually, it's a John Sayles I have never seen too, so I'm really looking forward to checking that out and discussing it with you next time. But before we sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using, and if you do enjoy the show or a particular episode, tell a friend or two about it. We're also up and running on the usual social media links. Just check the show notes on the episode player you're using right now. We have links going to all those. And until next time, I am Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. And stay safe out there, everyone, because, well, the Supreme Court just got rid of Roe v. Wade. Half the states are going to lose abortion access. This threatens gay marriage. This threatens contraception. But it's also part of a whole. It's part of the critical race theory panic, which is targeting any form of anti-racism and the capacity to have it in the public sphere, and all of the attacks on queer youth, on trans youth, which obviously specifically targeting trans people, but also is actually attack on all queer people and everything. All of this happening at the same time, not actually an accident. So we are in a brutal fight in a dysfunctional and broken political system in which, the tools that we need to do so in many ways still have to be developed, like the organizational capacity. And I mean, there's obviously a massive amount of work that's been done on this. It feels overwhelming, but it is actually winnable. And that's the thing is, if people are telling you to despair, tell them to fuck off, because this has been done. I mean, if you look at the example in Latin America, abortion has been won multiple times through street actions in places that you wouldn't, that it took immense struggle and decades of work, but they did it. And we can too. So if you're in the streets or if you're working in women's health and in abortion access or anything, stay safe and solidarity.